Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film Magic Magic. It is the latest film directed by Sebastian Silva. Alicia, played by Juno Temple, who has come to Chile to visit her cousin Sarah, played by Emily Browning, and go on a trip with her and her cousin's boyfriend Augustine, her cousin's friend Brink, played by Michael Cera, and I think Augustine's sister, I forget exactly how she fits into it, Barbara, played by Catalina Santillano Marino, from Maria Full of Grace fame. On their way there, Sarah realizes she has to go back to university and take a test, so they'll go to a faraway island, a 5-hour drive in Chile to a very remote island without Sarah. And Alicia doesn't feel entirely comfortable. This is her first time out of the United States. She's very confused. They're speaking Spanish to each other quite a bit. Even Brink, who is American, is speaking Spanish, so she doesn't understand what's going on. She kind of thinks they're sadists, and she can't sleep very well. In her sleep-deprived mind, things keep getting crazier and crazier, and she gets harder and harder to deal with. They're not entirely in love with hanging out with her, and then Sarah eventually comes back, but Alicia isn't calming down and isn't getting any more sleep, and she's kind of losing control. She's seeing things, she's just acting very erratic and strange, and it all takes on kind of an Ira Levin kind of quality to it, who wrote Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives. I haven't actually read those books, but I've seen those movies, so it's kind of that kind of idea. Basically, she is going crazy in her own head, maybe, or are all these people really that terrible? This film was made at the same time as Sebastian Silva and Michael Cera's other collaboration, Crystal Fairy, and Crystal Fairy was the side project, and this was the main project, whose financing fell out for a little bit, and they had financial problems, so they went and they made Crystal Fairy. Now, Magic Magic, unfortunately, got the crappier release. It's getting a DVD release, whereas Crystal Fairy gets to be in art house theaters. I don't think this film really deserves that. I think it's actually semi-decent, but they're also both about kind of a similar idea, that these kind of Americans who are visiting Chile and how they kind of deal with the area and the culture around them. They're interesting to watch together because whereas Crystal Fairy is a lot more fun and lighthearted, Magic Magic is a scary psychological thriller, and it uses kind of that Ira Levin idea of being in your own head. You're not sure, is it because you're seeing things just from Alicia, played by Juno Temple's perspective. So he's playing with that perspective quite a bit. But the interesting thing is, different than Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives, is it's not a sympathetic character. It's not a character at the beginning you're like, oh, I feel bad for her, this is her first time out of the US and in Chile, and she's with these really strange people. But then you start to think, like, maybe she's like, there's problems with her too, maybe she's not helping the situation. But these people are not really great people. They do all sorts of fucked up things to her, they mess with her, they make fun of her, but some of the times it's just things that they're kind of doing, like hunting. Not that I condone hunting or anything like that, but she kind of overreacts to it, but then they tease her more. And Michael Cera's character of Brink is particularly menacing and crazy and creepy, and he gives kind of the only real villainous performance I've ever seen from him, and it's very different from any performance I've seen from him before. His performance in Crystal Fairy was more kind of in the wheelhouse that we've seen him before, whereas Brink is entirely different, and it makes me think he could really play a villain incredibly well. I would feel uncomfortable going on a trip with him, and I'd probably be in Alicia's place a little bit, because he's a jerk. He's kind of like a weird hipster jerk. He's very similar to his Crystal Fairy role, but it does feel like a very different performance from him because there's nothing to sympathize with almost. I kind of do, because she is acting a little crazy, but then he does something fucked up to her, like they get her hypnotized at one point and get her to do all sorts of fucked up things, and then have her put her hand in the fire. They're like, well, we can get her to sleep now that we hypnotized her, but before we do that, let's completely fuck with her. I sympathize with them because she's crazy, but they're crazy as well. Looking at that format, that Ira Levin format, and going like, well, what if it's kind of a double-edged sword? What if it's not these people who are just the problem, she's the problem also? It's an interesting way to attack that kind of idea, that kind of format. You know, Repulsion did that, The Tenant did that. This is very Polanski-like in a lot of ways, at least in terms of its format. It's very well shot by Christopher Doyle, who also shot such classics as In the Mood for Love. He's a great DP, and he really does a great job shooting this film. I think it's a really beautifully shot film, and I think it uses the location very well. It's such a different location from Crystal Fairy, which is on a beach. There's a lot of sand, there's a lot of desert. This is very lush, a lot of green and colder water. Everyone's wearing a sweater. Crystal Fairy is more of a summery movie. Magic Magic's more of a wintry fall movie. I really recommend seeing both close together because you can really see kind of the idea of going on a vacation, the views of foreigners in Chile and how you react to Chilean culture. And this is taking more of a horror element, which is a spookier, cooler element. Alicia, played by Juno Temple, I thought she was really, really good in this film. Really good at playing this terrified girl who's first time out of the US. She feels very sheltered. She needs her sleep, but she can't get sleep. Her suffering from insomnia is really well played by Juno Temple, and this kind of makes me think more of her as an actress than I ever have before. Apparently a lot of this film was improv, and it does feel that way, but it still feels very scripted and controlled, which is something you really need to do a really good thriller. And it's an interesting mix of the two, having that acting style with kind of a controlled idea. And I think a lot of films, particularly I complain about Apatow films, fail at this a lot, where they try to do a very tightly scripted film but also be improv, and it just is a terrible marriage in two different styles. And this is a great marriage of those two styles. He has a good way of directing these scenes and understanding like the point of each scene, and it's not trying to be comedic. I think that's the other thing. It's not trying to be anything other than a thriller, so I think the actors had a pure intention and a pure goal of what they're going towards, rather than trying to do two things at once and not really succeeding at either. The one thing I think about this film that doesn't work, and the same problem I had with Crystal Fairy, is that it kind of runs out of steam at the end. This film goes in kind of a weird, surrealistic place at the end, which doesn't really work. I think it kind of falls apart towards the end. Both this and Crystal Fairy, it's like very strong at the beginning, but then the ending, it really kills the mystery. And I think it has actually a more problematic ending than Crystal Fairy, because Crystal Fairy, it still doesn't end very well, but Gabby Hoffman kind of saves it with her performance, even though it's a terrible scene. This film, they don't have a performance to really save it because it's all in this weird surrealistic place, and it's kind of cool the way it ends, but it's also kind of not working with the thriller. You really have to have a really killer ending, and having kind of an ending that was meh doesn't really work as well for it. And I didn't really like Magic Magic in that regard. It really kind of fell off for me, and I think that's kind of where the style of this improv and psychological thriller really fell apart, because it felt like he let the unplannedness kind of take over when it should have been really planned. The way it was feeling throughout the rest of the film felt very planned and orchestrated and smart. And he had the cast for it, he had the cinematographer for it. Sebastian Silva has the control over the audience, but almost feels like in both senses, he like lets go of that to do these endings that don't really work at all. They're like not emphasizing the point of what he's trying to do. They're like going in these directions the film never needed to go into. And it's the same problem in both Magic Magic and Crystal Fairy. I still need to see more Sebastian Silva films, and I said in the Crystal Fairy review I found that embarrassing, but I guess I've accomplished, and I've seen one more, and I like him as a director. I'm curious to see more of his stuff, and both this encourages me to do so, but I haven't seen a real solid film from him yet, and I hope to see one maybe in his past filmography or his future filmography, but I definitely feel like he has the strength to do that. But that wasn't on display in Crystal Fairy, and that certainly wasn't on display in Magic Magic. So if you have seen Magic Magic and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. And bonus points because they use Minnie the Moocher, which I like Minnie the Moocher, so you don't hear enough Minnie the Moocher.